Okay, yesterday we were starting to talk about the 92 days that somebody needs to read. But before that, we're discussing the case that a kohen is not allowed to marry certain women. We discussed a divorcee, with a woman who's called a zaina in halach, that means she had relations with somebody she wouldn't be allowed to marry, or a halala, a geyeris, by that matter, by the way. A kohen is also not allowed to marry a convert, even a proper halachic convert. A kohen cannot marry her because we assume that before she became Jewish, she wasn't trusted in who she was with or whatever. So the bottom line is a kohen cannot marry a geyeris either. So now the question, I had a question like that today. Now, there's a kohen, this is very common. A kohen, he's a Baal Tshuva, yeah, no, sometimes yes, sometimes no. He's a kohen. He got engaged to a girl who's non-religious. The question is, do you have to ask? Do you have to ask the girl, are you kosher to marry a kohen or not? The problem with that is, you know, there's an expression, if you ask, it's treif. If you don't ask, everything's kosher. If you ask, it might be treif. So the question is there an obligation to ask the girl, basically, well, were you with a guy? I mean, which is the most practical thing in today's world. Or you can just let it go. You don't know, you don't know. So most people today are of the opinion you don't have to ask. Unless if you know, you don't have to ask. A woman has a cheskes kashrus, whatever, you can assume she's fine. I said to him, though, one thing you have to keep in mind, that the problem is, if this girl, 10 minutes before the chuppah, somehow slips and says she was with a guy, that wedding's over. So in other words, it's, you know, if everybody just quiet, nobody asks, no mention, the girl doesn't mention herself to the kohen or whatever it is. But if the kohen a week before the girl, before the week of a kohen, they're talking, you know, everybody talks open. Oh, by the way, before I knew you, I was with a guy, yeah? Then they can't get married. So that is a very big risk that they have to be taking. So just people today have to keep in mind, do you ask or not ask? Now, once the woman is married already, and she comes to, a kohen's wife is married to a kohen, and she comes to her husband and says, you know, before we got married, I was with a guy. So the din is you don't believe her. Halacha says you don't believe her.
You don't believe her, or you don't have to break up the marriage?
You don't believe her. 1 minute. I'll explain to you in a second. Why? No, it's a very good point you make. There's a nuance over here. Why? Because the Gemara says here, the Gemara in Shechnarach says, Shemen nosna einav ba'achem. Maybe she decided to marry somebody else, and this is a good way to force the husband to divorce her. Because he can't stay married. Yeah? So therefore, if after the marriage, they're married already, the wife comes and says to her husband, by the way, before we got married, I was with a guy, they can stay married, there's no problem. But that woman, if let's say the husband dies, or it can be divorced because she could marry a kohen. If the husband dies, she cannot marry a kohen. Because she said on herself that she's not kosher. It's called shavi and nafshe. She made herself something permissible, forbidden. So to stay with the husband, she could stay married because we don't believe her as far as the husband goes. But as far as another marriage to a kohen, that she wouldn't be allowed to do.
Was with the goy meaning that she was married with the goy, not lived with the goy?
No, intimate with a guy. Doesn't have to be married. She had one-time relations of intimacy with a guy. She is permanently forbidden to marry a kohen. What?
8 years before she converts, if she's with somebody, she's allowed to marry that somebody.
It's not a question of married. A geyeris, the reason why a geyeris, even if she's under 3 years or whatever, they're not believed in that. So therefore, it's with Rabbanan basically that they cannot marry a geyeris because she's assumed to be what's called a zaina.
Also, can we say say I want to cannot and self-incriminate himself when it comes to saying to the crime that she was being with somebody?
That's as far as punishment goes. But a person can say that this phone is forbidden for me. A person could say that, even though it's not, but a person can make something forbidden. The woman, the fact that she says that she is not kosher lokayin, so she's not kosher lokayin. What?
How long does that apply? It's only before marriage? What happens if during the marriage she said someone yesterday, a goy yesterday raped him, or she was intimate with a goy? Do you believe that? You would just say,
No, you wouldn't believe it unless if the husband believes her. In other words, there's a din like this. If a married woman commits adultery, so she cannot stay married with her husband, she cannot marry the guy she was with. Okay? So what happens, as everybody knows what's going on in the world today, so what happens if a woman did have an affair with somebody? A married woman had an affair with somebody. Is she obligated to tell her husband? Halacha says she's not obligated to tell her husband. Sometimes, in this very, very complicated halacha, but sometimes if the woman says to the husband, I had an affair with somebody, the husband halachically can say, I don't believe you. If he believes her, then they cannot stay married. But if he doesn't believe her, I don't believe you. You're lying. You're making yourself a rasha. And that's the difference. Here, she's making herself a rasha. She's not believed. But if the husband believes her, so then for him, she's forbidden.
Can a Jew testify against himself or herself?
No.
So here she's testifying against...
So she won't get punished. She won't get capital punishment. She won't get kares. But as far as making herself forbidden, it's not a testimony. If somebody takes a piece of kosher meat, it says, this to me is chazer. I mean, they're making it forbidden to me like chazer. It's chazer. She's making herself forbidden. What?
All right, if a woman has an adulterous relationship with a man,
A married woman.
a married woman has an adulterous relationship with a man, and there are witnesses, but then her husband says, I don't want her to get punished.
It's not his jurisdiction.
He can't say it.
Somebody does a crime that they have to get punished, even in civil law. Yeah? Somebody committed a murder, and the husband says, the wife committed a murder, and the husband says, no, I don't want her to get punished. I mean, who's... he has no say. This is the court system, God. I mean, in halacha. What?
You wouldn't use the same logic that maybe she wanted to marry somebody else, and that's why she wants to incriminate herself?
But what is she saying?
She said she had an affair. So,
Yeah, but once the husband believes her, that's why you don't have to tell the husband. But if the husband believes her, he is making her forbidden on himself.
Maybe she wants to have
Is
a
she,
benz
Huh?
is she having a problem by staying married to him beside herself? Isn't she doing that there?
It's only if the husband, that's what halacha says, it's only if the husband knows about it or believes it.
But if she stays quiet, it's still on her cheshbon.
Doesn't matter. It's between her and God. Halachically, she could stay married.
Maybe she wants to have a ben zacha to make a doubt in her husband's mind. So
Okay,
that's-
let's just, okay.
and if he died, would she be allowed to marry that other guy that she said she was with?
No. Because she forbade herself to that guy on herself. But the problem is this happens more often than you think it does, by the way. Even in the religious circles. It happens. And there's big problems. Does he believe you? Basically, a lot of times they'll tell the husband, don't believe her. If they want to stay married, in other words. The bezin will tell the guy, don't believe her. Say you don't believe her. If he doesn't believe her, he's not us to him.
Does it work vice versa? If the husband has an affair?
He can have many wives.
Not in Ashkenazim.
That's only Chem Rabbeinu Gershon.
In concept, right? It's concept.
Let me ask you a question. If a married guy goes over to a single woman in front of two witnesses, Ashkenazi guy who's married, goes over to a single woman, gives her a ring in front of two edis, or gives her money, something. It says, in front of two witnesses. Does that woman need a get?
Yes.
Even if they're Ashkenazi?
Yes.
Okay. Now, what happens if a married woman comes over to a single man, and the single man gives her a ring and says, in front of two witnesses? Does that woman need a get from the second guy? No, because the kedushin is totally worthless. There's an interesting Neid Yehuda that he said how far Chem the Rabbeinu Gershon goes. There's a tshuva Neid Yehuda that many people pass like that. I mean, it's not so relevant. You know, you can send a shliach to give a get. Now, what happened? Rabbeinu Gershon says you can't force a woman against her will, divorce a woman against her will. No, in the time of the Gemara, yeah. Rabbeinu Gershon came along 1,000 years ago and said a man is not allowed to divorce his wife against her will. Okay? That's why women that don't accept a get, the husband can just throw her a get. Rabbeinu Gershon says no, that's it. So now the Neid Yehuda takes it a step further. That if somebody sends a shliach to divorce his wife against her will, he's not a valid shliach because ein shliach ledvar avera. There's a rule by an avera he can't make a shliach, and the Neid Yehuda says that applies even to Chenu the Rabbeinu Gershon, which only it's Rabbeinu Gershon, not even in Ameiris, so Rishonim. It was before Rashi, but so you wouldn't be a valid get.
So should he turn this to an avera?
In that respect. So change the Rabbi, because that guy was supposed to listen to Rabbeinu Gershon. But as far as a man goes, if a married man who can't have halachically, if he's Ashkenazi, a second wife, yeah, and he does kedusha with a second woman who's single, she needs a get from him. Because halacha, biblically, she's married. Now sometimes, it's late, sometimes the Rabbanim of the Gemara take their power very strong. For instance, biblically, I'm using hours just to make it, biblically, chametz is forbidden to benefit from at 12 o'clock. Let's say, the Chum said 11 o'clock, an hour earlier. That means from 11 to 12 biblically, the chametz still has value. You're allowed to use it. The Chachamim came along and said, from 11 o'clock you're not allowed to use the chametz. Okay? Got it? At 11:30, a man out of Pesach went with the bread and was mekadesh a woman with it. Now biblically, he gave her something of value because biblically it was still edible. It's not edible, beneficial. Edible also, minatayr. Chachamim said it's not. So now the question, L'chedam, minatayr, she's an eishesish. Biblically, she's a married woman because he gave her something biblically as value. The Chachamim said, no, you have to stop eating. You can't benefit at 11 o'clock. So the Gemara says, so the Gemara says it's not a valid kedusha. So the Gemara asks, but biblically it is? What do you mean? The Chachamim say it's a biblical eishesish. So the Gemara answers, Kol ha-mekadesh hadaita d'Rabbanan. It's a Gemara in Pesachim. Kol ha-mekadesh hadaita d'Rabbanan mekadesh. When you do kedushin, you're doing on the intent of what the rabbis want. You know, when you give a ring, you don't say, what do you say? Hariyat mukadesh li? Kedat Moshe v'Yisrael. Why do you add those words? Why can't you just say, Hariyat mukadesh li? B'tabazu. Why do you have to add Kedat Moshe v'Yisrael? So the Gemara says the reason for that is because when you do Kedusha, you're doing it the way the Chachamim want it to be. If they don't want it to be, it doesn't happen. That's the power that they have. Machachin is on Ma'al Yisrael. Machachin is on Ma'al Yisrael.